Good to see you all this morning. Happy spring. The earth swings slowly but inexorably, and we in the northern hemisphere begin once again to face the sun directly. Sunrise is almost east again and sunset west. And at midday, the sunlight begins to probe the winter armored soil instead of glancing off. The vernal equinox is here. The willows quicken. In the fields, the sparrows reach for song. Crows call in a new register, and jays chatter of days to come. The chickadees surpass their own twittering. On the hillsides, the brooks rouse from cold hibernation and begin to chortle. Ice groans in the rivers nudged by flowing water. The earth is slowly warmed. Change creeps in, not overnight, not in a day or two, but inevitably. March is not May, and snow and ice give way reluctantly, but the pattern is set. The sun is writing tomorrow's message on the earth. If you have a candle or a chalice at home, I invite you to get it now and to join me in the words for affirming and celebrating our liberal faith. We light this flaming chalice to illuminate the world we seek. In the search for truth, may we be just. In the search for justice, may we be loving. And in loving, may we find peace. Bob asked earlier how long we have been holding our services via Zoom. It's been a long time. We're aware of time passing. A year's come and gone, spring and sun, fall, a very long winter, and now the crocuses are come again, and somewhere a daffodil's blooming. Families were separated this past year. We lost loved ones without a proper chance to say goodbye. The holidays came and went unremarked, sometimes uncelebrated. Days drifted. We grew fatigued. We mourned. We were resourceful. We survived and found new ways to be together even when apart. And now we can hardly believe our luck. We rolled with the earth. We were bent, but we did not break. We were fortunate. We were blessed, maybe privileged. But we were also stubborn, as hard to eradicate as Russian sage or toad flax, sending up green shoots through the old dry stalks, our roots digging down deep into the stillness of quiet waiting, while hearts reached for tomorrow. From this long cycle of lying fallow and dormant, untilled, may new, more exuberant life come forth. Take a moment now to quietly breathe, to breathe in this new season, to breathe in new life, new hope, new possibility. Shalom and amen. When I chose my sermon topic to celebrate Women's History Month, I, of course, was not aware that this very week there would be a mass shooting in Atlanta. These shootings occur all too frequently. We've begun to grow numb. Many questions have been asked, concern expressed for the Asian American community, asking if this was a hate crime, as indeed it was. What's clear is that whether or not these victims were targeted because of their ethnic or national background, they were all killed because they were women. Because they were women, they were targeted. And they died, reminding us that even now, even with all the advances of the last century and a half, women still do not have the simple right to live in freedom, in safety, and in peace. We carry these victims in our heart even as we celebrate this Women's History Month. The reading this morning is from Little Women from the year 1868. Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, grumbled Joe, lying on the rug. It's so dreadful to be poor, sighed Meg, looking down at her old dress. I don't think it's fair for some girls to have plenty of pretty things and other girls nothing at all, added little Amy with an injured sniff. We've got father and mother and each other, said Beth contentedly in her corner. The four young faces on which the firelight shone brightened at these cheerful words, but darkened again as Joe said sadly, we haven't got father, nor shall have him for a long time. And she didn't add, perhaps never, but each silently added it, thinking of father far away where the fighting was. Nobody spoke for a minute. Then Meg said in an altered tone, you know, the reason mother proposed not having any presents this Christmas was because it was going to be a hard winter for everyone. She thinks we ought not to spend money for pleasure when our men are suffering so in the army. We can't do much, but we can make little sacrifices and ought to do it gladly. But I'm afraid I don't. And Meg shook her head as she thought regretfully of all the pretty things she wanted. Probably we all want pretty things. At the age of 36, already famous as the author of Little Women, Louisa May Alcott wrote a humorous verse summarizing her life to that point. She called it the Lay of the Golden Goose. Long ago, in a poultry yard, one dull November morn, beneath a motherly soft wing, a little goose was born, who straightway peeped out of the shell to view the world beyond, longing at once to sally forth and paddle in the pond. Oh, be not rash, her father said, a mild Socratic bird. Her mother begged her not to stray with many a warning word, but little Goosey was perverse and eagerly did cry, I've got a lovely pair of wings. Of course, I ought to fly. The poem goes on to tell how the other barnyard birds mock her efforts, the proud peacock and clucking hen scoffing. She could not sing, she could not fly, nor even walk with grace. And all the farmyard had declared a puddle was her place. Poor Louisa. She never had the charm of her little sister May, nor Beth's sweet disposition, nor the self-assurance of her big sister Anna. She considered herself always to be an ugly duckling. But the other barnyard fowl quickly change their tune when they discover that this little gosling can lay golden eggs. Suddenly, she's a celebrity. Great Chanticleer was pleased to give a patronizing crow, and the contemptuous biddies clucked, I wish my chicks did so. Wise owls awoke and gravely said, with proudly swelling breasts, rare birds have always been evoked from transcendental nests. The transcendental nest that nurtured this strange bird was the home of Bronson Alcott, a saintly but very eccentric and otherworldly figure. Contemporaries said that with his flowing white hair and calmness and purity of aspect, he had quite an apostolic look. Supposedly, a little boy visited the Alcott home and asked his mother, looking at Bronson, if that was not one of Christ's disciples. From his looks and his manners, he might have been. His lifelong vow, which he lived out, was to do no harm to man, nor bird, nor beast. He embraced every great reform and good cause of the day, from vegetarianism to abolition, books and ideas and profound thoughts. He had aplenty, but for money and material wealth, very little use. Being married to such a high-minded sort carried a price. Abigail Alcott regarded her husband with a mixture of love and wifely resignation, yet there were times when even her patience wore thin. A woman may live a whole life of sacrifice and at her death meekly say, "I die a woman," she observed. A man passes a few years of experiments in self-denial and simple life, and he says, "Behold a God." These were not easy years. They were years of real hardship. The little school that Bronson opened had to close when he insisted on admitting children of color to the academy. With a utopian friend, he bought a few acres in western Massachusetts that they called Fruitlands, where the family truly very nearly starved when the two men refused to use draft animals on the farm, regarding the harness as a form of four-footed slavery. When the Alcotts moved back to Concord, it was to a residence grandly styled orchard house, but which Louisa, with mordant humor, called Apple Slump. With no steady income, the tasks of feeding and clothing and comforting the four children all fell to Mrs. Alcott, who could trace her forebearers back to the Hancocks and other wealthy and illustrious American families, but who found herself living 2 or 3 notches below shabby gentility. Much later, Louisa would reflect that it requires 3 women to take care of a philosopher. And when the philosopher is old, the women are pretty much used up. And this was true. Loving Bronson was easy, but caring for him was a chore. When Louisa's alter ego, the heroine of Little Women, Jo, opens the novel grumbling that Christmas won't be Christmas without any presents, and her older sister agrees that it's so dreadful to be poor, they're talking from experience. Louisa's driving ambition through life would be to win financial security, to provide a few creature comforts for her parents and her siblings who were deprived so long. In her journals, she would record every sum of money she ever earned, from the very first story she sold for $5 to the royalty checks for tens of thousands at the height of her career. But while her childhood was one of straitened circumstance, it was very rich in feeling. There were weekly pillow fights on Saturday nights that were scheduled. They were part of a family regimen of having fun. There were homespun theatricals when young Louisa would don the role of the intrepid Duke Roderigo in the absurd dramas she both wrote and acted out on the barn floor. There was the friendship of neighbors like Mr. Emerson, who discreetly helped the Alcotts with loans he didn't expect to be repaid. And there was the high moral seriousness that was part of the Unitarian New England heritage, which helped Louisa turn every trial into a test and lesson of character. At 13, she wrote a poem titled My Kingdom. A little kingdom I possess, where thoughts and feelings dwell, and very hard the task I find of governing it well. I do not ask for any crown, but that which all may win, nor try to conquer any world except the one within. But there were bigger worlds for her to conquer. She was less than 20 when she left home to find her muse as a writer. I don't often pray in words, she told her journal. But when I set out that day with all my goods in my little old trunk, my own very small earnings in my pocket, and much hope and resolution in my heart, my soul was very full. Like many young writers, she faced failure and rejection, selling a very few fairy tales and romances. It was hard, frustrating work. It was not glamorous at all. She once advised a young author that almost any vocation, even digging ditches, would be preferable to scribbling. But this was also an obsession for Louisa, even when she considered her own literary output to be third rate. In Little Women, she described how her counterpart, Jo, could fall into a trance when the writing fit came on. She gave herself up to it with entire abandon and led such a blissful life of unconscious of want or care or bad weather, while she sat safely and happily in an imaginary world. Despite her talent, her energy, her drive, it wasn't until she was in her 30s that she met with any real success. During the Civil War, Louisa volunteered as a combat nurse. It broke her health, and she never recovered. She contracted typhoid, and the treatments included tinctures of mercury that poisoned her, that were almost worse than the disease. But if the ordeal depleted her physically, it deepened her in other ways. Hospital Sketches, published in 1863, offered honest portrayals of the men who were fighting and suffering on the front lines, and they fed a public hunger to know the truth about this terrible conflict. For the first time, Louisa had begun to write not of long ago times or fairy castles or faraway places, but writing about her own direct perceptions as a woman. When her publisher suggested she next try a book for girls, she was not very optimistic. Never liked girls or knew many, she journaled, except my sisters. But our queer plays and experiences may prove interesting, though I doubt it. When the handwritten manuscript was finished, her publisher was also dubious. Such a thing had never been done before, a coming-of-age novel written by, for, and about women that treated girls' lives with sympathy and insight. It wasn't until Mr. Niles showed the manuscript to his young nieces, who were completely bowled over, that he finally began to think that Little Women might have an audience. Money was not a problem after that. Louisa sent May to Europe to study painting. She opened a private school for Bronson where he could teach and conjecture without worrying about monetary considerations. But there was also always a measure of disappointment mixed with her success. For a private person, a homebody, fame had no allure. When I had youth, I had no money, she said. Now that I have money, I have no time. And when I get the time, if I ever do, I shall have no health to enjoy life. And there was also loneliness, even though she chose a solitary existence. She chafed at the idea of matrimony. Besides that, there was not anybody she really wanted to marry. As a girl, she'd had a crush on Mr. Emerson, but he was the wrong generation, more of a father figure than a beau. When forced to invent a dream lover for Joe, she'd imagined another older man, the Germanic Professor Bear. In her 30s, she'd been flattered with the attention of a much younger man, a Polish revolutionary, 12 years her junior, whom she met while on tour. But the men who attracted her didn't seem to be available, and the ones who were most eligible just were not that attractive. She may have had a hard time looking on any man of her own age and station as a complete equal. Most of her suitors she seemed to have regarded as faintly ridiculous. But the life of a spinster could also be drab. In truth, she was married to her work, but even at her peak, she regarded most of her stuff as trash. Her attempts to write serious adult fiction met with mixed reviews and meager sales, so she knew she was giving the public what it wanted, juvenile tales, but she never thought of herself as a great literary talent. She'd made her own way in a man's world, but part of the problem, as she expressed it, was that she had not been born a man. For a woman in the 19th century, life's possibilities were limited by propriety and tradition. She was an ardent feminist. In fact, she was the very first woman to cast a ballot in the town of Concord, but part of her would always remain unliberated. To the end, she was a dutiful daughter, gently caring for her aging mother and then father. She never fully separated herself from the family of her birth, but then it was not separateness, it was closeness that she wanted. Her dearest wish was to remain always a part of this loving family that had given her such a wealth of childhood memories that came to life again on the pages of her books. When Bronson died in 1888, Louisa followed him into eternity 2 days later. What would be an appropriate epitaph for Louisa May Alcott? Her own words from The Lay of the Golden Goose might be a fitting tribute. She knew she was no nightingale, yet spite of much abuse, she longed to help and cheer the world, although a plain gray goose. Her books have entranced and delighted generations of youngsters and grown-ups alike. And though her life seemed hard, thousands of girls were destined to grow up wanting to be just like Joe. To help and cheer the world to that degree should be enough for anyone. Thank you for listening.
It's really good.
Before I ask Gary for closing words, I want to take a moment to thank our members and friends for their continued financial support of our congregation. Your willingness to share your resources with the congregation is crucial to our ability to continue our mission, even as we meet virtually during COVID. I'd also like to mention our upcoming on events on Sunday, March the 28th. The circles will meet via Zoom on the theme of journeys. And then on Sunday, April the 4th, Gary will be back with us again, talking about famous last words. Gary, back to you.
The closing words are from Louisa May Alcott. Far away in the sunshine are my highest aspirations. I may not reach them, but I can look up and see their beauty, believe in them, and try to follow where they lead. And now we extinguish our chalice, but not the light of truth, the warmth of caring, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we are together, we hope, again soon.
Martha,
Martha?
you're on.
Thank you. Thank you, Martha. If you want to join a brief discussion, have questions perhaps for Gary, or just be part of a virtual coffee and donut session, please turn on your video, audio, and go to gallery view.